56 Hope Road in Kingston, Jamaica, has long been a place of pilgrimage for reggae fans. Once the home of the legendary Bob Marley, it now serves as a museum dedicated to his life and music. But as the sun sets over the island, and the last visitors leave for the day, the house takes on an entirely different aura, one that whispers of spirits, echoes of laughter long past, and a ghostly presence that lingers in the corridors. For years, staff and visitors have reported strange occurrences. The distant strumming of a guitar when no one is there, the scent of Marley's favorite herb drifting through empty rooms, and shadows that dance along the walls as if swaying to an unheard rhythm. Some believe it is just the energy of his music, still alive within the house. Others whisper that Bob himself has never truly left. One night, a young musician named Daniel, visiting from London, was granted a rare opportunity to spend the night in the house. Fascinated by Marley's legacy, he set up his recording equipment, hoping to capture inspiration from the very place where reggae history was made. But as the clock struck midnight, he heard its soft footsteps on the wooden floors, the faint humming of a melody he couldn't quite place. Then, the air thickened, a sudden warmth filling the room. His guitar, resting untouched in the corner, released a single, ghostly chord. Daniel turned, heart pounding. The air shimmered, and in the dim light, he saw a figured dreadlock swaying, a knowing smile on its face. Bob Marley? A trick of the mind? Or something far more mystical? Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The figure in the dim light didn't move closer, yet its presence pressed against him like a wave of warmth, humming with something beyond the living world. The scent of burning incense and something earthier like the lingering smoke of an old ritual filled the air. His rational mind screamed that it was just exhaustion, just the eerie ambience of the museum at night playing tricks on him. But then the figure lifted a hand, and the room itself seemed to exhale, as if the walls held a breath they had been waiting to release for decades. The humming grew clearer. Daniel strained to recognize the melody. It was familiar, yet different, something old, something unfinished. His fingers twitched toward his guitar, almost instinctively. And then, as if guided by an unseen force, his hands moved, forming chords he had never played before. The moment his fingers struck the strings, the air around him rippled. A sudden gust of wind, impossible inside a closed room, flickered the candlelight. The shadows on the walls stretched, took shape, figures dancing, swaying to a silent rhythm. Not just one ghost, but many. Daniel's heart pounded as a voice, low and melodic, threaded through the air. Music never dies, seen? But some songs, they wait to be finished. The words sent a chill through him, though the warmth of the presence remained. He swallowed hard, gripping his guitar tighter. "What song?" he whispered. Silence. Then 3 soft knocks at the wooden door. Daniel turned sharply. The museum was locked. He was alone, or so he thought. Daniel's fingers froze over the guitar strings as the 3 knocks echoed through the room. The sound wasn't forceful or threatening, just deliberate, like a question waiting for an answer. His eyes darted to the door. It was still closed, still locked. The candlelight flickered again. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, swaying like figures caught in a slow, hypnotic dance. The air pulsed, thick with something unseen yet undeniably present. Then softly, almost imperceptibly, the doorknob began to turn. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He told himself it was just the wind, just his imagination. But deep inside, he knew better. The door didn't open, but the knocking came again. 3 times. Steady. Insistent. Then, from behind him, the voice returned low, smooth, almost amused. "Ya ready to listen now?" Daniel turned sharply, but the figure was gone. Only the guitar remained in his hands, still vibrating with the last note he had played. The knocking stopped. The room held its breath. And then, from somewhere beyond the door, came the unmistakable sound of a record spinning. A faint, scratchy tune, as if played from an old vinyl, seeped through the walls, a song Daniel had never heard before. Yet somehow, it felt like he should know it. The melody curled around him, drawing him closer to the door. His fingers twitched at his side. Should he open it? Daniel's breath came in shallow waves as his fingers hovered over the doorknob. The record on the other side continued to spin, the melody weaving through the air like smoke, soft, hypnotic, pulling him closer. He didn't recognize the song, but something about it felt unfinished. A missing note, a lyric unspoken. He swallowed hard and pressed his ear against the door. For a moment, silence. Then a whisper. Not words, just a presence, a breath against the wood, like someone or something was waiting for him to step through. Daniel pulled back. His pulse hammered in his throat. Every instinct screamed for him to leave, to turn around and forget this night ever happened. But his musician's soul, the part of him that lived for sound, for stories buried in chords and lyrics, refused to let go. His grip tightened on the knob. Slowly he turned it. The door creaked open just an inch. The music stopped. Stillness. Darkness. Then, from the void beyond the door, a hand reached through. Not flesh, not bone, just shadow, curling like smoke, reaching for him. Daniel stumbled back, his heart slamming against his ribs. The hand hesitated, hovering in the air as if waiting. Then, from the darkness, that same voice, deep, smooth, familiar. Finish D song, brethren, before it finish you. And then the hand moved. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Daniel's breath hitched as the shadowy hand hovered before him, fingers curling like tendrils of smoke. It didn't lunge, didn't grab, it simply waited. The room around him felt different now. Warmer, denser, like the air itself was vibrating with something unseen, something unfinished. Then a sound. A single note, soft but insistent, rang out from behind him. His guitar, untouched, strummed itself. A low, humming vibration followed, not from the instrument but from the walls, the floor, the very bones of the house. The shadowy hand twitched. The unseen presence exhaled. Daniel's pulse pounded. He could feel the unfinished song lingering in the air, waiting to be completed. The melody in his head, the one he had never heard before but somehow knew, grew louder. The moment his fingers reached for the guitar, the presence shifted. From the darkness beyond the door, another sound emerged. Footsteps, slow, measured, getting closer. A voice not whispered this time, but deep and resonant, broke the silence. "D music never die, but you better play it right, you know." The shadow hand flexed. The footsteps stopped. The candlelight flickered. And then the door swung wide open. What Daniel saw on the other side made his stomach drop. The record was still spinning, but now the turntable had no needle. The song was playing itself. The shadows on the walls had taken shape, figures, moving, swaying, as if caught in an eternal rhythm. And standing at the center of it all, just beyond the doorway, was a figure Daniel knew, though he had never seen it before in his life. It was watching him, waiting. The guitar in his hands pulsed. The song in his mind pushed forward. And then, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room, thick and absolute. The warm glow of candlelight was gone, replaced by something heavier, an emptiness that hummed with unseen energy. Daniel's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. The guitar in his hands felt heavier now, almost as if something else was holding it with him. Then a spark. Not light but sound. A single plucked string vibrating through the void. Not from Daniel's fingers. Not from anything he could see. Then another. And another. A rhythm began to build, slow and steady, like footsteps approaching from every direction at once. And then the voice returned. "Seen? Now you feel it." Daniel turned sharply, but the figure from the doorway was gone. Or maybe it was closer. Maybe it was everywhere now. The rhythm grew. The walls of the house seemed to pulse with it, the wooden floors creaking in time. The air smelled different, salt, smoke, something ancient and electric. And then out of the darkness, a hand gripped his shoulder. It wasn't cold. It wasn't human either. It felt like static, like something between this world and the next. A rush of whispers flooded his ears, voices layering over one another, some singing, some laughing, some crying. One voice cut through the noise, clear and direct. Play the song, brethren. Before it plays you, the fingers on his shoulder tightened. The unseen presence leaned closer. And then Daniel's hands moved on their own. The first chord rang out, deep and resonant. Something shifted in the darkness. The rhythm changed. The shadows reacted. The song was starting. But Daniel had no idea how it would end. Daniel's fingers pressed against the strings. But the movement wasn't his own. The unseen force guiding him had a purpose and urgency. The first chord rang out, heavy and raw, vibrating through the floorboards. The shadows moved. Not aimlessly, not randomly, but with intention. A slow sway, a rhythm building, growing. The figures on the walls, dozens, maybe hundreds, shifted in unison, as if answering a silent call. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to stop, wanted to drop the guitar, but something in him, something deeper than fear, refused. The second chord struck. A sharp inhale echoed through the room, not his own. The hand on his shoulder lifted. And then laughter. Low, deep, almost amused. "Ya feel it now, don't ya?" The voice was closer than before, almost inside his head. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. His fingers ached, but they kept playing, as if the music had been buried inside him all along, waiting to be released. The walls trembled. The figures in the shadows turned. They were watching him now. Not as mere echoes, not as tricks of the light, they were aware. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the room, though the windows remained shut. The smell of earth, of rain-soaked wood, of something ancient and hungry filled his lungs. Then the whisper. "The last man who tried to stop, he never left, you know." The temperature dropped. Daniel's fingers struck the next chord, a wrong note. The shadows froze. The room held its breath. And then, from behind him, a slow creak of a floorboard. Something was standing right behind him. The air pressed in, heavy, charged. Then a voice, no longer a whisper. "Don't stop now." Daniel's hands trembled over the strings. He could feel it. If he played the next note, there was no turning back. But if he didn't, the floor creaked again. And this time, the presence behind him breathed. Daniel's fingers hovered over the strings, his breath shallow, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum keeping time with the unseen rhythm. The presence behind him hadn't moved. Not yet, but he felt it looming, expectant, waiting for him to make a choice. The air in the room thickened, pulsing like a living thing. The shadows on the walls no longer swayed, they were still now, watching, listening. Then a soft inhale, not his own. The breath ghosted against the back of his neck, warm, close. The next note, brethren. Daniel swallowed hard. His fingers twitched over the strings. He could feel the weight of the song pressing down on him, unfinished, demanding to be played. But what if it wasn't meant to be finished? What if that was the trap? His mind raced. The last man who tried to stop what had happened to him? Was he still here, trapped between the chords, lost inside the music? Another floorboard creaked. The presence behind him shifted. Daniel's breath hitched. Then the door to the room slammed shut. The vibration from the impact rippled through the floor, through his bones. A low, distant sound filled the air. Not the record this time. Something else. It was coming from the walls. No, from inside them. A muffled voice, lost in the wood, buried beneath years of silence. Daniel's fingers twitched. If he played the next note, would he set it free? Or would he take its place? The shadows in the room deepened. The presence behind him leaned in closer. And then the whisper returned, barely more than a breath. Choose wisely, musician. The song can only take one more. One more? One more what? The guitar in his hands pulsed, heavy, insistent. The next note was waiting, and so was something else. Something that didn't plan to leave alone. The guitar in Daniel's hands thrummed not from his touch, but from something deeper, something unseen. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was alive. The air around him seemed to warp, vibrating with the weight of the moment. The presence behind him had gone still, but it hadn't left. He could feel it waiting, measuring him. The voice had said, "The song can only take one more." One more what? One more note? One more musician? One more soul? Daniel's fingers hovered over the strings. If he played, he knew something would happen. A choice would be made. He could hear the whispers from inside the walls, muffled and restless. A voice trapped in the wood, waiting to be released. Or replaced. He thought about the stories, musicians who disappeared, melodies that lingered long after their creators were gone. Was that what happened here? Was this why the song remained unfinished? His pulse pounded in his ears. He could walk away. He could set the guitar down, refuse to play. But the shadows had other ideas. They began to move again. Not swaying now, closing in. The breath against his neck returned. Slower this time, deliberate. Tick-tock. Brethren. D-music, don't wait. The door was still shut. The walls still whispered. The presence still loomed. The next note was waiting. And so was something else. Daniel had only seconds to decide. Would he play? Or would the song play him? The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the hum of the guitar in Daniel's hands. He could feel it now, more than ever. The presence was no longer just watching. It was part of him. His fingers, no longer under his control, inched toward the strings. The song was unfinished. It was waiting for him to complete it, or for it to complete him. A low rumble, almost like distant thunder, shook the walls. The whispering from the wood grew louder, more urgent, blending with the music, forming something that wasn't quite a song. It was a warning. Then, the air changed. It grew colder, much colder. Daniel's breath fogged in the dim light as the temperature plummeted. He could hear the faint clinking of chains. No, not chains. It was something heavier, like the rattling of bones, echoing through the walls. The shadows that had once swayed now seemed to form shapes. Human shapes. Dozens of them. They stood in the corners of the room, their faces twisted in silent screams, their bodies frozen in a dance they could not escape. Daniel's eyes darted from one figure to another, each of them locked in a desperate, eternal motion, as if they were trapped in a song that never ended. Don't let it take you, brethren. The voice, thick with desperation, echoed from the darkness. It wasn't the voice from before. It was different. A warning from someone who had been there too long. But who? The guitar beneath his hands hummed again, its strings vibrating against his fingers. He could feel it pulling at him, urging him to play the next note. But each chord that had passed, each strum, it felt more like a surrender. He glanced toward the doorway, now completely closed, the shadows stretching like tendrils across the floor. There was no escape. The walls were closing in. The music was the only way out and the only way deeper into the darkness. His heart raced. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a ghost. It was something in between. The figure moved slowly toward him, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It smiled, but the smile didn't reach its eyes. You ready to finish? Or you ready to join the chorus? Daniel's fingers were still hovering over the guitar strings. The figure stepped closer, its presence pressing in on him. Every instinct screamed at him to drop the instrument and run, but the music wouldn't let him. The figure's smile widened. It reached out, its hand brushing against his cheek. One more note, brethren. Daniel's heart raced, a frantic drumbeat in his chest. His fingers were still poised over the strings, but his mind screamed at him to stop, to walk away, to let the song die, let the shadows fade. But the figure before him, its glowing eyes, its twisted smile, wouldn't let him. One more note, brethren. The voice was insistent, but there was something else, something in the air, something cold and desperate. He could feel the weight of the song pressing against him, pulling him in, urging him to complete what was started long ago. The presence behind him, the shadows in the walls, the figures in the corners, they were all waiting. Waiting for him to make a choice. Daniel could feel his fingers shaking. It was no longer a question of whether he could play. The music had already taken control. His hand moved on its own, guided by something older, something ancient. He struck the final chord. The moment his fingers touched the strings, the room exploded with sound. It was a wild, chaotic noise, a melody of 1,000 voices layered over each other's screams. Laughter, joy, pain, all mixed together in a cacophony of life and death. The walls trembled, the floorboards cracked, and the shadows swirled violently, as if the house itself was coming apart. And then a silence, a deep, suffocating silence. Daniel froze, the final note still echoing in the air, vibrating against his skin. He turned slowly, afraid to see what he had released, what he had unleashed. The figure was gone. The shadows were still. The music had stopped. But the air was thick. The presence still lingered. And there, in the center of the room, was something he hadn't seen before: a door. It wasn't there before. It wasn't part of the house. The door was old, made of dark, weathered wood, adorned with carvings that seemed to shift when he looked at them. The handle was made of bone, cold to the touch. A voice, low and familiar, whispered in his ear. "Now you see it. You played the song. But will you walk through it?" Daniel stood there, paralyzed, staring at the door. He had played the music. He had finished the song. But now, what did it mean? Was this the price of completing the melody? Was the door a gateway to what? The house seemed to breathe around him. The walls creaked, the floorboards groaned, and a cold wind howled from somewhere deep within the house. Then, from the darkness beyond the door, he heard it. A soft strum of a guitar. The first note, unfinished. And the whisper came again, now louder, more insistent. "You still got one choice, brethren. Will you finish what was started? Or will it finish ya?" Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.